Okay. Like a lot of Egyptologists, I got caught into it by the time I was like 5 or 6 years old. My earliest memory is being taken to the Met, a New Yorker, and seeing mummies. And I think that's a gateway drug for a lot of Egyptologists, the first time they see a mummy or something Egyptian. And when you grow up in New York, there's a lot of chances to do that. And I can date it because in 1955, there was a real potboiler called Land of the Pharaohs, which was about the building of the Great Pyramid with Jack Hawkins, that noted Arabic actor, playing Khufu. And I remember making my mother take me to see it, that I saw the trailer in the movie theater, and I had to see it. And that's a 1955 movie. So now I've also dated myself, but there you have it. And it just grew. I just always remained fascinated. I grew up in New York in the Bronx, which has relatively few opportunities, if any, for Egyptology. So I just kept going to the Metropolitan Museum and just went to a local high school. And when I got to college, I found the art historian who was a classicist, but it was close enough. So I did my BA in art history. And bless him, the teacher, Jacob Rothenberg, sent me to the Brooklyn Museum to do my honors project on Amarna, because who doesn't want to do Amarna? And I discovered the Wilbur Library and the Nathan's cafeteria in the museum. So I would go to the Wilbur Library regularly, and that was the first time I was really among or around anybody who was truly an Egyptologist. Richard Fazzini, Jim Romano, Ann Russman were there at the time, and they were just really nice to me. I was probably, you know, the strange teenager, or maybe they recognized that same kind of strange passion, and they were just very encouraging. And when I graduated City, I applied to PhD programs, and Brandeis is the one that gave me the most money. Therefore, I went to Brandeis and studied with Louis Jobkar. So I went to Brandeis, thank you Brandeis for the money, and it was a rather wild and unusual place. There was an Egyptologist, Louis Jobkar, who did specialize in Egyptian religion and language, but there was also Cyrus H. Gordon, who had helped decipher Ugaritic. There was an Arabist. There was an ancient Near Eastern archaeologist. So while it may not have been as focused as, say, someone who went to the Oriental Institute, it was also more broadening because everything was in context. And it was really a rather wonderful time. I was finally doing what I wanted. I was lugging around 20 pounds of Gardner's grammar with pleasure every day. And it just felt fine. I was finally doing what I really wanted to do. When I finished my doctoral comps, Dr. Jobkar, who rightly felt that his students should not be exposed to just one Egyptologist, had talked to colleagues of his in France after a conference, and two of them offered us, his students, the opportunity to come work with them. And he asked myself, Susan Dahl, and Mary Ellen Lane if we would like to spend a year abroad in France. Duh. And he said the two choices were, the two people he had talked to was Francois Domas in Montpellier to do Ptolemaic, or Paris with Jean Leclanc to do Meroïtic. Now, I barely knew what Meroïtic was. Jobkar had done rescue campaign in Nubia, and so he had encountered Meroïtic culture and history, and did teach a course on ancient Nubia. So I had some idea of it, but that wasn't really what happened. It was very clear. You asked three 24-year-olds, do they want to go to Montpellier or Paris for a year? You're going to go to Paris. So that's how my career in Meroïtic started. I wanted to go to Paris. And I worked with Jean Leclanc there, who was a really generous, lovely man, and got my thesis topic, which was Anubis and Meroïtic religion, in a sense from him. Susan Dahl began her work on Menopid and Meroïtic religious material on those sarcophagi of Anlamani and Espelta. And the truth is once I came back from Paris, if I really didn't want to keep doing Meroitic, I could have switched thesis topics and gone back into true Egyptology. But I was rather entranced with it. Back in the 70s, it was pioneering work. I didn't have to fight with 1,800 dead Germans and their texts in order to create an argument. And there was something really appealing about that. I really liked that sense of being a pioneer would have been really too strong to put it, but being at the beginning of something rather than dropped in the middle of this very, at that time, strong European tradition of Egyptology. So I just kept working. I did my thesis and I just kept working on Meroitic things because I liked it. And it was a real challenge, sometimes a frustrating challenge, but I just liked the fact that what I was doing could be fresh and new. In terms of my teaching and how I earned a living, there were, what a surprise, no jobs in Meroitic studies in the United States. Nobody even knew what it was. And Nubian studies was barely on the radar. Egyptology was terrifically competitive, and I didn't really fit that mold anymore. So what I did, and it has worked out in hindsight rather well for me, is I became a generalist. And I became and my degree, and I had courses in art history, so I started teaching in art history, and it was really almost an accident of fate. I put my vitae on several databases. Someone at LSU needed a quick emergency sabbatical. I was hired to teach ancient art history at LSU on 10 days notice. And when you're young, you say, sure. So I just packed up my apartment and moved to Baton Rouge, Louisiana on 10 days notice and started teaching art history courses I'd never taught before. And just worked extremely hard and really loved Louisiana. But then I was offered a tenure track job, which this wasn't at the time, at the University of Florida, Gainesville. And since it was tenure tracked, I moved there and continued teaching to undergraduates primarily, ancient art history and some more general courses. And I love art, and I love talking about art, so it was fine, and it kept me employed for my entire career, but it really made me bifurcate. I had my professional research, which was the Meroitic Ancient Nubian, and I had my professional career, my teaching career, which was more as an ancient art historian / generalist. And since this is pre-internet, there were no resources for research in Gainesville. And also, the man I eventually married was in Boston, so there were a number of compelling reasons, and we won't talk about which was the more compelling, but I decided to move back to Boston. And again, 3 weeks before I was due to move, a job opened up at Merrimack College, which was a small Augustinian college where they needed an ancient art historian / generalist. So that took care of that. I moved back to Boston, where I've stayed, near my beloved library, the MFA, and Bob, and just kept teaching in the Boston area until I did some research teaching at Harvard and Brandeis in my discipline, and that was really nice to just really do Egyptian and Nubian studies at a high level. But those were visiting professors, sabbatical replacements, or in the Harvard case, a visiting lectureship. And for most of my time in Boston until I retired, now it's 2 years ago, I was teaching at a small private college called Babson. And the bifurcation continued, but I have to say that Babson didn't know what to do with me as an Egyptologist, so they just kept giving me research money. They rather liked the idea of having me on the faculty, and I was glad to let them keep feeling that way. So it worked out really rather well. I would teach art history as a missionary to students who would probably never be exposed to it under other circumstances, and kept doing my research with some really generous support from Babson. And about 2 years ago, I decided it was just time to stop teaching, that I was something of a dinosaur, that I didn't want to deal with Chat GP. And I said farewell, and I'm having a terrific time just doing my research. From my thesis, Anubis and Meroitic Religion, the Ancient God of Embalming, I developed just a strong interest in Meroitic religion, religious art, religious iconography, and that's where my research kept me going, dealing with that topic. At a conference in, I want to say, the mid-1990s, right after the fall of the Berlin Wall, I met Friedrich Hinkel, who had been working for the Sudanese government. He's an architect, working for the Sudanese government, conserving and restoring and consolidating the pyramids at Meroë, the seat of the ancient Nubian kings, and just hit it off with him. He had this incredible photo archive of the reliefs on the walls, which I had used for my thesis. He was going every year. So I said, how would you like to do a project with me? And without knowing really what I was doing, I applied for an enormous NEH grant to publish his work on the pyramids and my work on the chapel reliefs in a publication we would do together. And didn't work, and I resubmitted again. Didn't work. I resubmitted one more time. It worked. We got a very nice grant, thank you, NEH. And Fritz and I began working on documenting the pyramids. He the architecture, me the chapel decorations, which are the scenes of funerary rituals and various offering rites in over 40 royal chapels. He had wonderful photographs, great documentation, but I had to see it myself. So I've been to the Sudan now over the years as I've been working to publish these, about 5 or 6 times. And each time what I really do is just go into the chapels and stare at them and correct the reconstruction drawings we've had made, photograph details, because what I've discovered is the devil is in the details with iconography. What kind of food are they offering? What kind of vessel are they holding? Which are the gods that are participating? Sometimes, as you know, it's just the crowns or the smallest detail that identifies who these deities are, especially since a lot of them are, the chapel walls are uninscribed. So I've just basically spent most of my time in the Sudan at the pyramids of Meroë. I've certainly traveled and visited other sites, but I would say the lion's share of my time has been at Meroë. And after Fritz Hinkel died, the project sputtered along for a few years and then was rescued by the Qatari missions, the money the Qataris put into archaeological missions, and I became affiliated with the German Archaeological Institute, which was given Fritz Hinkel's enormous archives. The man was an incredibly organized accumulator of data. He was fierce, and it's not just Meroë, it's sites all over the Sudan. And Hinkel's family gave that archive to the German Archaeological Institute, which had the money from the Qataris to scan it. And God bless his family, they stipulated that I went with the archives and that I continue to have publication rights to the work I had been doing for Fritz. So in the last few years, we've been wrapping up one enormously complicated volume. And one of my collaborators, Jochen Halloff, who is the linguist, the philologist, and I are continuing to publish the big royal cemetery. And we're doing it in a more pared-down way than Fritz Hinkel had done it, which is one reason why we'll probably actually get it published. Fritz's version is still inching its way through the very careful but laborious publication processes of the DAI, and we will not do that this time because I'd like to be alive to see it. So that's the research, and where I'm putting most but not all of my time. So the current conditions in Sudan, as many people know, is become the victim of a proxy war. It is not a civil war. The Sudanese are not per se fighting themselves for reasons that grow from internal conflicts. There are external partners paying two major factions to fight each other. And the damage has been devastating to the population, above all, bombing, famine, drought, destruction of an infrastructure, the electric grid, the water grid, but also to their cultural heritage. As is now common knowledge, the National Museum, which was a treasure trove of Sudanese art for millennia of time, it covers millennia of time, has been looted. Objects have been taken on trucks and driven to the borders and are probably being sold on the antiquities market. The looting has been extensive, and what these teenage, because they're all young men, they're just bored young men, did is if they couldn't pack up the things, they just smashed things senselessly. They hacked out walls of temples. It's just been devastating. And even the monuments that have been untouched in areas of relative calm in the north and central area, like at Meroë, thank God, and Jebel Barkal, another sacred site with many pyramids, have not been attacked. But because there are no resources to protect them, they're being damaged by the environment, the maintenance that needs to be done to protect these soft sandstone monuments from the elements. The Sudanese have heroically been trying to do that, but the head of the antiquities service in that area told me in thank God for WhatsApp, in a WhatsApp chat, that he's sorry he hasn't been in touch with me, but the water system is down, so every day he has to go to the Nile River and bring back water for his family. And only then does he maybe have some time and energy to go to the site and do whatever work he can do. So it's heartbreaking, and I am absolutely unsure of what survives. There's been pillaging. Some sites seem to be intact, some storerooms seem to be intact, but nobody knows that for sure. But the major repository in Khartoum, I don't know that it can ever be remediated. It just looks like there's been a tremendous loss of cultural heritage. Imagine the Metropolitan Museum of Art being looted with that kind of encyclopedic record of Western civilization. And what the looters couldn't fit on trucks, they just decide to smash because they're bored. It seems to be a deliberate campaign to erase Sudanese identity. It's just horrendous. In the face of this awfulness, there's also some really positive signs, because the international community has been organizing with the Sudanese and under the guidance and the information provided by the Sudanese to do what it can to rescue objects, to create what's called a red list, where you put out on the internet what stolen objects are to perhaps impede their sale. But in a way, it's opened some opportunity in a strange way, because with all the Western archaeologists who have been partners with the Sudanese for decades, unable to really work there, you can see the Sudanese self-organizing. And not just the archaeologists, but local towns and villages have taken upon themselves very often to try to protect the sites that they're aware of and to clean up the sites and do what conservation work they can. And the Sudanese, some have stayed in the Sudan, many have had to flee into exile, but there's been a slow and steady growth of self-organization, which is so important because it's not the West telling the Sudanese what to do, which was the old colonial model. But so much of what's happening now to protect Sudanese cultural heritage is really being generated by the Sudanese, which I think some awareness amongst Western people who are committed to their heritage and some humility in knowing that they have to lead this process. And that's been really heartening. in addition to these activities catalyzed by the Sudanese, it's also generated an awareness of how important publications are. There are pre-existing ones that document museum holdings, monuments in the Sudan, and they become increasingly valuable. But the other thing that's becoming very valuable is the awareness that we really need to document everything as we go, because there's this sense things can be ephemeral now that we've seen what's happened in the Sudan. And there are projects by the Sudanese, by non-Sudanese academics, to publish catalogs, to publish museum holdings, to publish excavation records that have been sitting in museum basements perhaps for decades. So there is a push now to conserve and preserve whatever knowledge or materials we still may have or know of, to give them a kind of permanence in the face of what we've seen can happen and how ephemeral some things can be. So scholars are really rallying around that kind of activity and exploring archives and museum basements to find material